I had a question about existential OCD and existential depression that I thought was a really useful one. The person was talking about a sudden experience of this when they were younger and that they fell into nihilistic pessimism, which was difficult to bear on a daily basis. They've had this a very long time, 30 years, with more or less severe episodes, and they feel the vision of life has changed and won't change back, so that they'll always have this agreement with the OCD and depression, and they're looking for reasons to change their view on life because of this suffering, but they're struggling to find anything. And I thought this was a really good question. Again, OCD recovery is a principle based thing. So ideas here would be relevant to all OCD themes. In fact, in the DSM diagnostic manual, there is three levels of insight for all OCD themes. So you have good or fair insight, poor insight, and then absent insight. And they even say delusional beliefs. And this is where individuals are completely convinced that the obsessive compulsive beliefs are true. So this can happen with anything. People can believe they're a terrible person. They can believe the world isn't safe. They can believe they've done things in the past that they haven't. We can lose insight on all kinds of things. I think it's common in existential OCD. Existential OCD, so often our mind is trying to solve these unsolvable philosophical problems that have been there throughout all of history, and great thinkers, everyone has thought about these things. In fact, a lot of great thinkers have actually struggled with existential crisis, which really is existential OCD or depression. People like Darwin, William James, many other great thinkers had episodes where they really got stuck on things like free will and whether life is meaningful and other difficult topics. And the difficulty is that really our mind is just trying to get certainty. So we have a question that is uncertain, and often in OCD, our mind for a long time is trying to reassure us that it isn't as bad as we think, or that we aren't, living in a well with existential OCD, that really life is meaningful, or we are connected, or life is real, or we are in control, or we are feeling love and happiness, and pain isn't more intense than that, or any of the sort of philosophical questions your mind can loop on. And then after a while, because we're still hitting uncertainty, because no one has figured out the answers to these questions definitively, and it's debatable whether our nervous system and brains even can do that, as we are an animal and we are evolved to just survive and procreate, which in and of itself can be a triggering thing to hear from an existential OCD point of view. So work your skills with that if that's triggering. Um, but yeah, our brain eventually goes, oh, I just want certainty on this. And then it starts to try to prove the fear is true. And it gets more and more complex in order to do so. And it wants to avoid the threat. So it wants to prove it's true and then avoid whatever the danger is, or it wants to prove it's true to avoid the uncomfortable feeling. So uncertainty for humans is a very uncomfortable feeling. It's like a negative valence deep in our core, like an itch in our nervous system, and everyone wants to get rid of that in certain areas of their life. And just look around the world and see how people find uncertainty very difficult, and they defend against it with different means. Some people go very anxious, some people go very aggressive, some people distract themselves. Like, humans aren't great with uncertainty. Different things happen. And actually, no animals like uncertainty. And there's even studies on rats where they'll stay in a painful environment that they can predict rather than go to a new environment which is uncertain. And so with this kind of thing, we want the certainty of, like, yeah, life is pointless, meaningless. It's all very painful. At least then I've got my expectations right. I'm not raising my expectations high to be really happy and to feel really connected and have a meaningful life. So there can be a sense of certainty there. But then again, once the brain starts to feel certain, there's still doubt. And then we're flipping around again and going, is this really true? Do other people feel like this? Am I really, fated to this lot in life? Or is there other things? Are there recovery methods? Are there ways around this? So then we're back into trying to, reassure ourselves. And then we've got a debate going on. On one hand, we've got a very depressive voice saying this is true. On the other hand, we've got an anxious voice saying, what if it's not? Maybe it's not. And then that's the compulsions. And what I say about insight is that lack of insight, I think, almost always, I mean, I've never seen an exception to this, but maybe there could be, it always comes with a lot of rumination. So if we are analyzing, ruminating about a topic over and over and over again, then we start to get so confused that we don't trust our basic sense of self, our history, our senses, our experience in the world, our relationships, common sense, you might call it. We start to not trust that because we've unraveled it. We've gone very, very deeply into this, and we start to have these kind of existential crises. And you actually see this in people studying academic topics. And I can't remember, it's either Dracula or Frankenstein, one of those classic books. One of the protagonists is actually studying and studying and studying, and they end up having a crisis like this. So there's an element of, if we are ruminate, analyze, and we're teaching our brain it has to solve every uncertainty. And as Mark Freeman says, who you might have come across on YouTube in the OCD world, if we're trying to solve all these little uncertainties, it's not long before it goes for the big uncertainties. And what's more uncertain than our sense of self, our place in the world, free will, reality, life and death, what happens after death, these sorts of things. So that lack of insight comes from a lot of rumination. The other thing I think it comes from is when we have very intense intrusive thoughts or feelings. Like if we're having very intense and repetitive intrusive thoughts and very intense levels of anxiety, distress, depression, doubt, guilt, and grief and other things, then it all feels more believable and real as well. So the antidote really to the lack of insight is getting the compulsions down through our ACT skills and through ERP, and then getting our acceptance up of the intrusive thoughts through our ACT skills, ERP, any metacognitive approach, mindfulness-based approach alongside the ERP, but exposure, being a very important ingredient to that. And then as we get more insight, our confidence comes back, and we start to trust our basic sense of self and experience of the world. So we trust that actually we don't need to figure out if life is meaningful or not, and instead we just live meaningfully and do the things that matter and get our attention into them. And we don't need to solve these problems. We may think about them from time to time. I occasionally think about these topics, but we're not doing it for hours and hours a day anymore. And we're accepting that, if the greatest minds in history and scientists and everyone else haven't solved it, we're not going to solve it through rumination. And your experience teaches you that, and actually it digs you in deeper. We're also monitoring the feelings as well. That can be another thing. If we're constantly monitoring our low mood and depressive feelings, then we're amplifying that like a microphone by a speaker, and it's amplifying. And then we are getting more pain, and then it's reinforcing this sense that life is all pain and there's no escape to it. And we lose insight that way. So we've got to get the rumination down, the monitoring of our feelings and low mood down, the thinking about existential topics down, and the engagement in life much higher. And you find if you do this enough, you become like regular people who don't ever think about this stuff, or they might do, but they're not thinking about it 24/7. Someone who doesn't study with existential OCD, you talk to them about it, they'll be like, I can never solve that. What's the point in thinking about that? Actually, I want to just go and play football or listen to my favorite band, or be with my family. And yeah, I don't need to solve that. And then they just go do those things. And yes, they have other ups and downs and difficulties, and everyone's struggling in different ways, but they're not looping on this topic. So we've got to train our brain to do that. And your brain will fight back. Your brain will say you're in denial, or there is loads of pain, or life is worse than happiness, or the happiness isn't enough, and you're not really enjoying it. And we've got to work with all that resistance and use our skills to get out of that, and focused on life deeper and deeper, and higher levels of acceptance of that pain. And I had to do this a lot with my existential OCD. It really fought back, and it would question everything, recovery methods, whether people really had recovered. I would go into the antinatalist sort of view of like there's more suffering than there is happiness. And my mind would give me all these convincing arguments. And I had to learn, just like OCD, that I didn't have to believe the catastrophic, worried, anxious thoughts. I didn't have to believe these depressive thoughts either. And really, I didn't have to engage with whether they were true or not, because no one can solve that. Even if you feel your life is in such a place that it has that much suffering, well, people get out of that place, people live meaningful, happy lives, people learn to cope with immense suffering and pain, people recover from, very intense, major suicidal, depression, other things, and our brains are all the same. So, you know, like there's just uncertainty. Even if you feel right now it's certain that your life is going to be overwhelming pain forever, you don't know that. Your brain is just locking on to trying to get a sense of certainty so it can predict the future, or there might be other functions to it, which we'll look at. So it can be a resistance, it can be like a secondary spike. So I'm working with the anxious OCD presentation. I'm not doing compulsions to that. So, anxious brain says, what if you don't have free will? Or what if life is pointless? Oh my God, wouldn't that be terrible? And you go, I'm not going to ruminate, going to just acknowledge that thought, going to engage in life. And then it goes, you're kidding yourself. It is like this, and it's trying to get you to go back into the compulsions, back into avoidance, back into, I've got to solve this, or I've got to be certain on this, and I've got to measure my expectations about how painful life will be. And there's often a core fear around being unhappy in life, and it wants to prepare you for that core fear. And that is the case. And at least I want to know that and prepare for it, rather than live in uncertainty and, take the actions of a meaningful life. So we've got to just be ready for that secondary resistance. And OCD will do this often, and the inner critic might get in there, and it might be a very critical voice saying, "Oh, you're kidding yourself. You're in denial. Everyone else is wrong." And you might feel there's anger in that voice as well, that recovery isn't simple and isn't easy, and your deck of cards in life is very tough. So it might go into that resentment loop together with it, and kind of existential resentment. And we've got to be ready with all of that: diffusion, acceptance of the feelings, engagement in life, getting the compulsions down. We can also look at the function of it. Does this belief that the brain's trying to convince us of, does it have any function? And one of them is, like I said, it's preparing ourselves for an unhappy future. But another can be, if I believe that, then I don't have to take the risks to connect to people and potentially get my heart broken or things go wrong. It really isolates me, these existential beliefs. So if I've had a difficult history with relationships, it might be trying to get me to avoid connection, avoid people letting me down. I might struggle with social connection because I haven't had a lot of practice, or it doesn't come naturally to me, or something like that. And so it's trying to isolate us from the group and, get us on our own. It might also be trying to get us to be submissive. So if I believe all these things, then I'm sort of submissive. I'm not going to be dominant and taking a position in the tribe and living a meaningful and assertive sort of life where I'm pursuing goals. It's going to make me submissive. So it can be that. It can be to get me to give up on goals that are thwarted and not possible, or goals that I may have set too high and were unrealistic and haven't allowed for me, the need to develop more skills and competency and mastery, or maybe They're just the wrong goals. They don't lend themselves well to my personality and who I am. And so it's trying to get me to be hopeless and give up on goals. It can be, me to avoid life and to not put out so much energy and effort and resources. So it's like a way of our organism conserving resources. So we're going back to the cave and we're avoiding the dangers if we think about the potential evolutionary context. But this is like all of that biology applied to human happiness and a meaningful life. And sometimes it's just trying to monitor the pain and the emotional, uh, depressive low mood. And it's doing that to try and predict and avoid and control that threat. But in doing so, like an autoimmune disease where the immune system turns in on itself, it's sort of turning in on itself and amplifying the low mood and proving our belief that everything is terrible and no one loves anyone and there's no point in anything and we're all going to die and everything's hopeless. It's trying to get us to sort of go into that belief, to monitor all that pain, and then it's reinforcing it. Um, and so you can ask yourself, what would happen if I gave up on this belief or I went back to it's just uncertain and there are things I can do that may improve my life, and let's see if I can do that. What am I afraid of? Is it I'm afraid of failure, afraid of being let down by people, afraid of anxiety? It's better, it feels more comfortable to sit in depression than go towards anxiety and have to face that as I take risks. Is it, a natural reflection of a painful life that I've had, and I need to do some therapy to heal that and trauma and other things, and I need to build some new relationships that are much more loving and connection and take, the actions of love. So looking at, what are my fears there if I didn't follow this belief and really using the ACT idea of workability, like even if there was truth to this belief, how useful is it? If I focus on this, what's it going to do to my life? Um, Actually, it's going to undermine my confidence in myself that I can handle pain and do meaningful things. It's gonna, make it very hard to focus on joyful stuff and to amplify those good moods. So it's not going to be workable. So let's try the actions of a different belief and see what happens if I do that. Um, Relationally, are there these relational factors, and have we been taught things in relationship that really haven't taught us how to upregulate positive mood and feel joy and happiness? And have we had parents that were depressed or very critical or difficult experiences in school or trauma or abuse or things in our past that have taught us these sort of messages about life, and actually we need healing in new relationships where there's love and we can give love, the action of love, even if we don't feel it, and feel deeper connection and really heal it through that. And Tom Rath, who I like, who's this positive psychologist that has this ongoing sort of experience of multiple cancers and tumors that he's had throughout his life, his experience was the thing that helped him cope with all that suffering, immense pain, surgery, more suffering than we can imagine, was loving connection and service and thinking of others and connecting to others. So can we focus on that and go towards that and see what that does over time? And also this idea of meaningful suffering, that satisfaction is we suffer over something and then we achieve it in different ways. At a very mild level, physical exercise, you work hard and it's very difficult, and then you feel good after that and satisfied. Same with study and other things that are difficult. Well, this is like can be a more dramatic, level of this. If I face OCD and depression, I work hard on recovery and I get more connected to values, there's immense satisfaction in that. And it's very empowering. And it does make meaning of the suffering. I can tell you from, my own intense periods of suffering where I was, very suicidal, in my thoughts and feelings and hopeless and ongoing intense symptoms, OCD, anxiety, depression, depersonalization, just going through all of it daily basis over and over. now that feels like meaningful suffering because of what it taught me. And so we may as well give that a try, even if we're not there yet. Let's see what happens after 3 months, 6 months longer. And don't underestimate our resilience. It will tell us it will go on forever, that I can't handle it, that nothing matters, or sorry, that there's nothing I can do to, help me with it. And actually, that's not true. Feelings do go up and down. Who knows what will happen if we work on recovery? We can handle it. We've been handling it. We've gotten through it, and there are things you can do. There are small things that may shift the needle a tiny bit if we get connected to values. Um, so as I said before, we've got to think about the workability of these thoughts and beliefs. If I put this thought or belief in charge of my life around existential hopelessness, well, it's going to lead me to ruminate. It's going to lead me to probably avoid things, not go all in on life as much. It's going to distract me. It's going to keep me focused on pain that then will amplify pain and make it more difficult, versus it could be more workable to work skills, try and get out of all that rumination and monitoring and checking my feelings, and instead get more engaged in life and values and goals. And if I'm unsure about values and goals because I've been so deep in this for a while, I can just choose things, try them out, can use other people as inspiration, can do values practices off this channel, or people like Russ Harris and Steve Hayes have lots of value stuff available for free online. And generate some core values and important domains of my life, and then some goals and actions and things I want to do, and try to work on that more, and see what happens, see if that's more workable. And those values and goals being a choice. I don't have to justify to existential OCD that these are right and meaningful and life is good, or I have free will, or I'm not alone, or whatever it's saying. No, I don't need to justify that. I can use my skills and just choose. And I had to do this. Like, my existential OCD was making me, or giving me, the urge to listen to just endless philosophical content, spiritual content, other things that were trying to answer these existential questions. And it was uncomfortable for me to put that down, and psychology content as well, put that down and actually start to listen to funny podcasts. And my mind would be like, there's no point in this. This is a waste of time. You got to figure out these thoughts. This isn't funny. You're not enjoying it. Life is pointless, blah, blah, blah. And I had to go diffusion and engage in the silly, meaningless podcast. And I remember the British TV show Taskmaster was very good for this, because they create these tasks that really are meaningless, and that's part of the joke of the show, is that everyone's engaging in completely seemingly pointless tasks, but in some ways, how are they different to any other sport or any other chosen thing? They just happen to be about funny household objects and funny ideas and concepts. And so for me, watching a show like that and not listening to my mind going, oh, this is showing the futility of life and it's all pointless and meaningless, and diffuse that and engage in it. And I remember early on watching, the beginnings of that show, and being struggled and troubled with it. And then now I love it. I absolutely love that TV show. Funny people doing silly, pointless things. I don't need to worry about that, but it was uncomfortable as I was trying to make these changes. So it won't be that you work on the stuff in this video and it's immediately easy and you're not struggling with it. It will feel uncomfortable. OCD will fight back, depression will fight back, and we've got to be determined with our skills. And again, that's all the input for satisfaction. If I'm struggling, working hard, I'm training something up, it's like the physical exercise that at first feels unbearable and uncomfortable. And then as we start to hit goals and feel fitter and stronger, it feels amazing, to the point where you can, nothing better than feeling exhausted and pain and difficult, uncomfortable physical sensations, and the urge to give up on exercise, and you keep going, and you feel incredible meaning and purpose and fulfillment in that. We want to do the same sort of emotionally and psychologically here. Um, the actions of the values being important, not justifying it to the beliefs, not following these other beliefs coming from existential OCD, but simple daily actions and getting out of rumination and monitoring and checking and into the experiences, into the actions of connection, the actions of love, the actions of joy, the actions of satisfaction, the actions of meaning and purpose, and using others for inspiration if we're struggling with it. Joining groups and countering this urge for isolation with social connection and contribution. Um, a lot of self-compassion. It's a very painful place to live. Like the person who asked this question, a few decades stuck in this painful place. We've got to be incredibly self-compassionate. And there might be grief there about what led us to feel so hopeless about life and also living in this hopeless place for so long. And we want to not go into resentment and regret and going through all the things we've lost out on, but instead compassionately grieving and feeling that pain and then moving forward. And Paul Gilbert, who developed compassion focused therapy, he talked about having an existential grief where he was really feeling anger and rage and grief at the universe and how painful and the suffering that was there, and he had to feel and move through that with compassion to get to a place where he felt motivated to work on relieving suffering and to help people and help the world become a more compassionate place. So sometimes there is this phase of grieving, either our history, the pain and suffering of life, meeting it with compassion, and then it becomes meaningful suffering that we can use to help others. Yeah, depression can be this feedback loop. And it's, the existential thoughts are one way it convinces us to avoid and withdraw and ruminate, but really go back to those functions and what is it feeding back to us? Is it something about social connection? Is it something about my history? Is it something about the unfair, unjust, toxic society or place I'm living, the culture around me? Is it goals and is it something about being submissive and withdrawing? Is it conserving resources? Is it trying to monitor the pain? Is it trying to predict the future and predict that it's going to be all painful so I can understand that? So, what is the feedback? What is it telling me? Is it telling me I'm just out of harmony? I'm not sleeping well. I'm not exercising. I'm not eating the right stuff. I'm not socially connecting. Like, have I got all those pillars of well-being in balance? How am I with social connection? Do I need to work on it? Do I need to find the right people or improve my competency and skills in how I, express empathy, express needs, boundaries, assertiveness, some of the common social connection processes. Do I need to work on them? Do I need more play, more creativity? People whose minds tangle on this often, their mind needs to be on complex problems that you can solve rather than this one. So, do I need to direct it into a change in career or a change in hobbies or a change in interests and study and learn about stuff for the sake of it, or take up new challenges in life? And is it a way of trying to avoid that, but actually I've got to push through that to get to a more meaningful place, um, and really take home messages. We've got to work with a therapist if we're really deep in this. It's going to be very hard to do that on your own. Yes, you can use self-help resources if it's not possible to work with the therapist, and people do recover. And actually, a lot of my meaningful recovery work was on my own, implementing the ACT skills, the ERP stuff I'd learned and working on it on my own. So it's not that you can't, progress on your own, but if you're really deep in this, you need support and help. And if you're feeling suicidal, needless to say, you need help right away with people who really get this and understand it, and reach out and do that because it can all change. And I think of it like this magic eye type picture where you look at it one way, it's one image, it's the, old hag is one of these ones, the old sort of hag they call it, which is a bit judgmental and disparaging to elderly people. But anyway, that's what they say in the picture. And then you flip it around and it's the beautiful woman that, and you can see both things in that picture depending on how you're looking at it. I think life is like this. It can flip one way, it can be that way for a long time, but it can flip and go the other way. And suddenly these things that felt so important and meaningful to solve or to believe and agree with suddenly seem very unimportant and not as painful, not as difficult. And that can flip after a long time. And then if we're in the moment, we're achieving goals and living values, that can be worthwhile, even if we've had decades of pain and suffering before it. If we can turn it around, even a year living like that is worthwhile and meaningful. Even a week, a day, is meaningful in that place. So yeah, don't, listen to that voice. Part of mental health recovery is learning our brain is not always giving us accurate and useful feedback on the world. We have to learn to detach, to observe it, to not react, not believe it, and instead pour our attention and action into values and goals that matter to us.